Thank you so much, Ambassador Bolton, for this interview. We are MOXY, a 21st century public square. We support democracy and we try to foment democracy through informed public dialogue and civic participation. That is our goal with this channel and with this endeavor. So let's get right to it. I know you wrote an op-ed yesterday on the U.S.'s military deployment in the Caribbean, with Venezuela specifically. Do you think that this is actually battling narco-terrorism, or is the true motivation here regime change in Venezuela?
Well, I think the right policy for the United States should be regime change in Venezuela, both for the benefit of the people of Venezuela, but also for U.S. national security interests. The presence of Russian, Cuban, and Chinese, Iranian, and other extra-hemispheric foreign powers really poses a threat not just in the immediate neighborhood of Venezuela, but to the U.S. and really everybody in the hemisphere. So this is something that in the first Trump term we tried to do to support the opposition against Maduro. It didn't succeed. This may or may not be a second effort to oust the Maduro dictatorship. I think if we're going to do it, we should do it right. We failed the first time. We owe it to ourselves, really, and the people of Venezuela to get it right this time.
What role do you think hydrocarbons are playing in this military display?
Well, I think in Trump's mind, it's sort of always about the oil. It's always about something tangible. But I think if you look at properly at what's at stake, I think the intrusion of these external forces into the hemisphere is threatening to us and to all of our neighbors. So there are plenty of good reasons, even if Venezuela didn't have any oil and gas at all.
So what do you think is the actual, what should the U.S. response be in Venezuela, given the fact that China, Russia, Iran are involved?
Well, I think the way that the administration has proceeded has not been very effective. I think blowing these drug boats out of the water has a lot of problems associated with it, not the least of which is giving Moscow and Beijing pretty clear advance notice that something could be happening, trumpeting the dispatch of the Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group shows that a great amount of force is potentially being brought to bear. That's just going to stiffen their resolve to keep Maduro in power. And I think at this point, there's really no good sign that we're aligning ourselves with the legitimate opposition. And I think that's critical because if Maduro were to fall, it's the opposition that would have to explain and justify to the Venezuelan people what they wanted to do and how they proposed to do it. And if we're proceeding really without regard to the opposition in Venezuela, we're putting them in a very difficult position.
And you don't think that the government or the actual legitimate government of Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez, you don't think that the United States is offering them enough credibility or working with them, legitimacy?
I don't think it's correct to say, well, we're going to get rid of Maduro and we'll tell you opposition leaders what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. I think working together was what we tried to do very intensively in the first term, and I think it was a powerful factor. We didn't succeed, but we were aligned with the opposition. There's still time to get the U.S. and I hope other countries in the Western Hemisphere aligned with the opposition. Back in 2018 and 2019, the Lima Group of Western Hemisphere countries really created, not with much involvement of Washington at all, it was the feeling of all the countries almost within the hemisphere, with exceptions like Cuba, that they wanted to do the right thing for the Venezuelan people. I don't see that coming together here. I think there are a lot of things we can do to be more successful this time, but I don't see any strategy being displayed by the Trump administration.
So you mentioned Cuba. What relation do you think would have if there was a toppling of the government of Maduro on Cuba and that government?
Well, I think it would have a very negative effect on the post-Castro regime. I mean, I think in Trump's first term, I spoke of the troika of tyranny in the Western Hemisphere, including Nicaragua, along with Venezuela and Cuba. I think if one of those three falls, I think the other two are in jeopardy. So there's a lot at stake here. And we did try once in the first term, and I don't want to see a second failure in Venezuela when we could avoid it if the administration would just get a coherent strategy.
These governments, of course, are propped up with drug money. They're narco-terrorists, which have now been deemed narco-terrorists. Why has the U.S. and past administrations allowed this to go on and to get to this point where all of these countries are now involved, including Mexico?
Well, I think it's very hard to explain that there just wasn't adequate attention to the flow of illegal drugs into the United States. We've had great success before when we've cooperated with governments in Latin America. Plan Colombia, for example, was a great success. Unfortunately, we've lost the bubble on that, and now narco-terrorists are back in Colombia and trafficking through Venezuela and other countries. The drug problem's an American problem. If there were no American demand for drugs, they'd have to sell it in Europe and elsewhere. So we're part of this, and that's why we've got a stake. But it's not something where we can just say we're going to determine that these problems are going to be solved by the U.S. alone. It's something we need to work with the countries that are affected by it.
Do you think there's a willingness from the White House to actually have strikes within Mexican territory, as Donald Trump has mentioned in the past?
Well, the president and others in his administration have talked about it. I think that's almost certainly the route to failure. This is a difficult problem, there's no doubt about it, but if we work together with the governments involved, I think there's a much greater chance of success. Venezuela is not the worst drug problem in the hemisphere. I think in Mexico, the threat of the drug cartels, the amount of local leaders, journalists, and others that they've killed pose a real threat to the stability of the government of Mexico. The United States should not destabilize the government further by acting in a military capacity without cooperation from the Mexican government. I think if we apply ourselves, we can build a coalition in the hemisphere against illegal narcotics and have a much greater chance of solving the problem.
And so how do we deal with it internally, domestically?
Well, I think there has to be more attention to it. I don't myself believe in legalizing many of these currently illegal substances.
Certainly not fentanyl.
Right, exactly, and that's a good demonstration of how this threat doesn't just emanate in this hemisphere. This comes from China primarily, and the Chinese cynically know exactly what they're doing. They're helping weaken America, weaken the countries in this hemisphere, and we need more attention to that, which is why I think these attacks on the drug boats, they may look good, the photographs may look good, they're not solving the problem. They're telling the people who are pushing the drugs that they just have to be a little bit smarter in how they get them into the United States.
Are these strikes even legal?
Well, I think there's a good question about that. You know, the U.S. over its history has tried to separate the military functions from the law enforcement functions. There's a good reason for that. There's a long history of military involvement in law enforcement that really reduces the democratic nature of the societies that are involved. There are areas of cooperation, but we need to distinguish what we're talking about. Are we worried about the drug threat? We worried about the influence of governments like China and Russia in this hemisphere. You need to be coherent and clear about what your problems are and therefore what your objectives and means are to deal with those problems. I don't see that in the current White House.
There's no doubt that China has an incredible presence in Latin America that has continued to grow and grow and grow through the decades. How do we offset that?
Well, I think we need to recognize that the problem is here. The Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is not just in Asia, it's not just in Africa, it is in the Western Hemisphere. The Chinese have incredible capacity for long-range strategic thinking. We do not. And it should be an opportunity for the countries in the hemisphere to work cooperatively together that strengthens U.S. national security when people see this external threat for what it is.
When you talk about China having long-term strategic thinking and the U.S. doesn't, do you think the fact that we're so polarized, that we have these political issues and that we have two parties and we have 4 years Democrat, 4 years Republican, and this infighting, which is also funded by China, let's make sure that we know that. Do you think that that is part of our will lead to our demise? Is that part of a weakening of America, the fact that we don't have that long-term vision?
Well, I think we can have the long-term vision if we can get a clearer picture of what we're worried about. I mean, I think the turnover of governments in democracy is a good thing, but as we showed during the Cold War, you can have consistency notwithstanding changes in party. And if you look back to the 2018-2019 period, just specifically with respect to Venezuela, Trump administration had strong bipartisan support in the effort to overthrow Maduro. We don't have that now. We have a lot of criticism, complaining that Democrats aren't being briefed, complaining about the assaults on the drug boats, and it shows that the White House is not proceeding strategically, either internationally or domestically. The politics are not what they could be, and I think it's in part because the president doesn't see the utility of assembling a coalition that agrees that the problem needs to be eliminated. He's stronger when he gets allies and friends and cooperation domestically, not weaker.
Let's talk about the charges that you're facing, federal charges, 18 federal charges because of the classified documents. Ironic that Donald Trump himself was facing charges such as this. They were dismissed. Do you feel like you're being targeted?
I think there's no question about it. I can't really talk about the case. I'd like to, but it's just not the appropriate moment to do it. But I wrote as far back as January of 2024 that I thought a second Trump term would be a retribution presidency, and unfortunately I think that's what's happening. I mean, one of the first things he did on Inauguration Day, which is normally a pretty busy day for a new president, he removed the Secret Service protection that I and others had against the threat of Iranian efforts to assassinate present and former members of the U.S. government. So that was a pretty good signal to me as somebody who was affected by it about how the new administration would behave.
So given that you had a role in advising the president and then you publicly criticized him, what can the citizens learn about dissent, about engagement? What can we tell people?
Well, I think it's a great loss for the United States when people are afraid to speak out for the government, against the government. Free speech is fundamental to representative government and democracy, and if people are intimidated, if they're afraid to speak out, we lose as a country.
So much territory to cover. Let's go back to China and this Cold War regarding AI and rare earth minerals. How do you see this playing out in the future where AI is so important for even national security?
Well, I think in a society that prizes creativity and free thinking like the United States does, if we just allow that to go forward, we will find ourselves in the stronger position. There are many things the government can do in terms of assisting research. I don't think the government needs to be involved in ownership of these companies. I think that's just copying China. We don't want to become like China. We just want to make sure they can't make us become like them. This is a whole of society approach the government of China has taken against us and others around the world. So it's taken us a while to appreciate the breadth and the scope of the challenge and the risk that China is posing. I think we're seeing it now. I think we've still got a long way to go.
How do you think the administration has handled the situation with Iran?
Well, I think there's not going to be peace and stability in the Middle East until the Ayatollahs are replaced in Tehran. So I've fully supported the Israeli-U.S. strikes against the Iran nuclear program, which is an existential threat to the state of Israel and to the U.S. and friendly states in the Middle East. I think we stopped too soon. I don't think we did enough damage. But ultimately, it's for the people of Iran to get control of their government again. We ought to be helping them out more. This regime in Tehran has a radical ideology. It's a threat across the Middle East and really internationally because of the nuclear program. And to act in a non-strategic way really strengthens their hand. I think the government of the Ayatollah is very weak inside Iran. I think the people are very discontented with it. And when the Ayatollah Khamenei passes from the scene, that could be a real moment to split the government at the top and allow the people to take control.
Well, internally, in Iran, we're seeing protests. They have a problem with their water supply for the people. Yet there's a report that came out that says that there could be another war between Israel and Iran. What role do you think the United States would play, and what implications would it have for our nation?
Well, we have pretty good evidence, it's out in the public domain, that Iran has resumed work on its nuclear weapons program. As I say, for the Israelis, this is an existential threat. Israel is a small country. 6 nuclear weapons detonated on their territory, and there is no more Israel. So it doesn't matter who the prime minister of Israel is. I don't think Israel itself will ever permit that. What the Ayatollahs are doing is showing how fundamentally they can't be trusted to make commitments. They've said they would not go after nuclear weapons, but they obviously are. And if that work continues, as it seems to be, I have no doubt that the Israelis will take further action. I think we should work with the Israelis, with the Arab governments of the region. They don't want to see Iran have nuclear weapons either. I think bringing the regime in Tehran down could result in Israel being much more widely accepted, and therefore the chances for lasting peace and security in the Middle East would be greatly enhanced.
We're in the Middle East now. So you have said that the only way to really have peace in Gaza is through the demilitarization of Hamas. We don't see that happening. They're not necessarily putting down their weapons. So how do we find a solution there?
Well, I think the Trump 20-point peace plan really achieved getting the living Israeli hostages returned and the remains of most of the hostages who are deceased. But the plan goes no further if Hamas doesn't demilitarize. And as you say, there's no evidence that Hamas is prepared to do that, which is why the objective that Israel has stated from the beginning, that Hamas as a military and political force has to be eliminated, is the right objective. Until this cloud is removed from over the heads of the people of Gaza, they have no future. And that's the real humanitarian problem. So looking at the humanitarian question, the elimination of Hamas is the prerequisite for a better future for the people of Gaza.
Well, they have no political representation. They really don't have leaders. And so how do we install a government there that could be respected by a world forum?
Well, I think we should be asking what is the best thing to do for the people of Gaza once Hamas is removed. Gaza itself is not a viable economic entity. I mean, it's part of a road around the Mediterranean, and the whole history of that piece of land has been sort of disjointed. So I think asking whether resettlement in other Arab countries might not be desirable. Many people have left Gaza of their own volition. They've gone to Egypt and other places. I think the countries of a region have a real duty to help support those people, to put them and their children into viable economies where they can have a future, and to give up this idea there's going to be a Palestinian state. I don't think it works. I think you've got a separate problem on the West Bank, but there I think Israel and Jordan working together are much more likely to find a solution than to try and follow the sterile dead end of what they call the two-state solution, which I don't think with the prospect of terrorists on their border, the Israelis are prepared to accept.
So would the PLO actually ever be leadership for the Gazans?
Well, I don't think the people of Gaza wanted the Palestinian Authority. They chose Hamas as the alternative. I think they've seen quite clearly that was not the right decision. But the Palestinian Authority remains corrupt and really irrelevant to the humanitarian solution I think we should all be looking for the Palestinian people.
And just out of curiosity, what is your reaction to the Trump plan of developing Gaza and turning it into a Monaco?
Well, you know, I don't think it's likely, but I know it's simply impossible until there's political stability. You will not have external investment come in to create jobs, manufacturing, businesses, if they think the risk of war or terrorism is going to resume, which is to come back to Israel's stated objective of getting rid of Hamas as a military and political force. I think that's absolutely critical.
Do you think Israel's influence on you in the U.S. is outsized in Washington?
No, I don't think so at all. I think people really misunderstand. Israel has a lot of support in this country as a democracy under great threat. It's not just Jewish support, it's evangelical Christian support, it's the support of many people around the country who admire that the Israelis are standing up for their liberty and freedom. And I think anybody who tries to imply that somehow there's some conspiracy that controls Washington or international finance, it's really engaging in anti-Semitism. I mean, I think we should call it for what it is.
Russia, there's a deadlock. It seemed like this was going to be a very short war, a very short intervention in Ukraine, and yet here we are years later, and the U.S. is still funding and supporting Ukraine. Do you think this is sustainable?
Well, I think we misunderstood for nearly 4 years now what Russia's objective was. It was to recreate the Russian Empire. This is not a land dispute. This is something that goes to the philosophy of Vladimir Putin and the elite that supports him, and of many Russians as well. If we had approached the invasion in 2022 as a strategic matter, we would have come up with plans to help Ukraine push the invaders out to achieve what every NATO country says is our objective, the full restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. We would have had a more strategic plan to deliver the assistance that we've given to Ukraine rather than having it dribbled out one weapon system at a time. We might have avoided the gridlock that we see now and the tremendous loss of life and destruction of Ukrainian territory. I think there's still time to do it, but not on the theory that Russia's willing to negotiate now. Putin won't negotiate until Russians are beginning to lose the war visibly. And that's the time when you could actually get an outcome that would be stable and would give the Ukrainian people control over their territory again.
Does it surprise you that they're bringing in mercenaries from Colombia, from Cuba?
Well, I think it shows how desperate the Russians are. And this is the kind of situation where really if we show not just the Russians but the Chinese and others that unprovoked aggression like this against a country like Ukraine, even though not a NATO ally, very important to NATO members in Europe, we're simply not going to allow this kind of unprovoked aggression to succeed. That will have a significant deterrent effect that could protect Taiwan against China and protect others in the neighborhood of countries like Russia and China, that they won't have to face this in the future as well.
Is there a scenario where the conflict in Ukraine ends diplomatically without weakening U.S.?
I don't see it at the moment. You know, the president has said he thinks this is a senseless war. It's not what the people of Ukraine think. They think they're fighting for their freedom and their liberty and their homeland. And the Russians, I don't agree with what Putin is up to. He thinks he's recreating the Russian Empire. They don't think it's senseless. They have very different objectives, and at this point, I don't see the potential diplomatic compromise. I think if Ukraine could be shown to be winning the war on the ground, I think that might cause enough internal dissension in Russia that then you might begin to talk about a diplomatic solution.
In a country that's so polarized politically, how do we begin to engage people, to bring them to the center, and to begin to have a peaceful dialogue on issues such as these that are so incredibly important?
Well, we need political leaders who are prepared to stand up and say, we don't like the backbiting, the personal attacks. Some of that's always going to happen in politics, but let's debate the issues. Let's not debate the personalities. Let's talk about what we think the right American foreign policy is, what we think the right tax policy is, the right economic policy. Let's have debates. Let's let people hear the different sides. They'll make up their minds. That's what a democracy is. But the bitterness, the personal attacks, really, they should play no part. It's human nature, but that's what our objective should be.
We've always had decorum in this country, and we really have lost it. But we also know that we have influence from China, from Russia, in our narrative, in our political conversation and discourse. So how do we deal with that as an average citizen in this country?
Well, I do think this is something that we should all be concerned about. I mean, Americans disagree among themselves, that's great. But when others are trying to affect our public opinion from outside the country, that is absolutely illegitimate from our point of view, and we need to be united in trying to oppose it, to find out where it's happening, and to prevent the foreign people who don't have our best interest at heart. They have their best interest at heart. That's not what we need. We really need consensus on making sure that that doesn't happen. Many tools the government has to help protect us, and we ought to support it.
Should the United States continue to try to be a world leader, or do you think we should take a step back and kind of allow other governments like the European Union and such to take the lead?
Well, we're a world leader because we have interest worldwide. We have people from all over the world who have become citizens of the United States, which I think is an incredibly positive thing for us. We have economic interest everywhere. We really are the only global power, and protecting those interests and our friends requires a forward American policy. We can't sit back and say these two broad oceans are going to protect us. That may have worked 200 years ago. It doesn't work today. It hasn't worked for a long time. A strong America is an America that deters its adversaries, that makes its adversaries think we're not even going to contemplate challenging the United States. We'll work it out with them diplomatically. Using force against the U.S. and its friends and allies will never work. So what Ronald Reagan called peace through strength, not what some people say today, what Ronald Reagan called peace through strength was the best way to defend American interest and prevent actual military hostilities. It's strength that deters the opposition. It's not American strength that's the problem, it's American weakness that's a problem.
How do you think we're perceived around the world with Donald Trump at the helm?
I think people have lost faith in us. They've lost trust. The tariff policy has been terribly destructive. American leaders, Republican and Democrat, in somewhat different ways, have worked for decades to build up reliance and trust on the United States, that people understand that obviously we protect our own interest, but we don't willy-nilly disregard the interest of others. And I think with an erratic, non-strategic presidency, we've put a lot of that in danger.
I interviewed the former president of Costa Rica yesterday, Laura Chinchilla, and we were speaking about the tariffs and the effect that it's had on her very small country in Latin America, a country that's doing well, that has a strong democracy, a country that's pretty strong considering Latin America, especially Central America. And she was saying that U.S. has now imposed a 15% tariff on their products when they just had a slight superávit. In English también, in English we say superávit. Sorry. How do you see that, to punish a country, really, that's a Central American country, that is doing extremely well, that is really a stable country, and just because they had a bit of an advantage to charge a tariff that high? What does that say?
Well, number one, there's nothing wrong with having a trade imbalance with a country. The economic doctrine of comparative advantage tells us we're not going to do some things as well as other countries may, and we do a lot of things better than they do. So that's what trade is all about, to get mutual advantage economically. There are issues here about fundamental fairness for Americans, that's for sure. We don't want to be mistreated, we don't want to be discriminated against, but we should have no fear of trade, especially in this hemisphere. So this is the kind of effect that tariffs have. People say, but why are you doing this? It makes both sides worse off. And I think if we could get back to what Ronald Reagan believed in, which was basically you worry about strategic issues in trade, but on most other things, you welcome free trade because it makes all the people who participate in it better off. And it's why Ronald Reagan also looked to bring more people in from around the world to help recreate the American dream. We decide who gets in, not the people who want. There's a process to do that. But America is stronger as it gains more people from around the world.
Now, if you will indulge me, I like to ask people about their heritage and their immigration story. And it started because I'm Hispanic, and anytime you ask an immigrant how they got here, it makes for a good story. But then I realized we're all immigrants. So I would love to ask you, how did your family come to the U.S. and what's your experience?
Well, I'm 80% Scottish. I have a little bit of English, Welsh, and Irish, but all four of my grandparents came from Scotland in the early 1900s. They didn't know each other at the time, of course, but that's how they ended up, and that's why I'm 80% Scottish.
And how did you get here? How did you know that you wanted to pursue this career and ultimately become ambassador to the UN, National Security Advisor? You've really had such success. How did you do it?
Well, I never envisioned what it would be, but when I was a little boy in public school in the second grade, I had an exchange teacher from England who sort of opened my eyes to the larger world. And I grew up in Baltimore, which at that time was the second largest port on the East Coast, second only to New York. And it was a port that brought in ships and people from all over the world. So I was always interested in international affairs, and that's probably the basis for the way the career developed.
I'm so glad I asked those questions because honestly, it really put you in a different light, despite the fact that it was an incredibly wonderful interview. Thank you so much for indulging me in all my questions. I'm also Scottish, by the way.
Oh, no kidding.
I'm about 45%. My mother's Cuban.
Oh, no kidding. That's
So
interesting.
Spaniard and Scottish.
That's great.
Peebles.
Great. Yeah.
There's a town in Scotland called Peeblesshire,
Is that right?
but my people are from Glasgow.
Uh-huh. Yeah, my
brother.
They sailed from Banff. They were not Highlanders. They were all Lowlanders, but where they lived, we sort of lost that in the...
Yeah, so people probably think my temper is from being Latina, but no, it's from being a Scot.